John already talked a little bit about the DEI panel that was, or the think tank that was held this morning. And thanks again to King & Spalding and to Simpleview for sponsoring and hosting that event. And to give us a quick overview of the key findings of the think tank, I'd like to bring to the stage Greg DeShields, who's the Executive Director for Tourism and Diversity Matters and Diversity at Philadelphia CVB. And then he will introduce his panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's not that late in the day. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I'm actually able to take my mask off. So I wanted to share some insights as it relates to the think tank. And I don't know why we called it a think tank. I felt it was more like a brain explosion. This morning, we had such a passionate and committed group of leaders that gave some incredible insights as it relates to the perspectives of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are a couple of key things that I wanted to draw to everyone's attention that really came out of the conversation. Most importantly, that as corporate leaders and as leaders of government, there was clearly a desire to do more, that it's not enough at where we are today, but that they feel that there is a lot more that we can do. But there was an underscore message that we have to be intentional in terms of the efforts of which we pursue, that we have to focus on building strong DEI cultures, and that we have to lead by strategy and have that strategy integrated and embedded in all that we do, and to have an oversight as it relates to procurement to ensure that there is access for all, and in any way possible, make sure that there is enforcement or at least reward for those who are participative. But I will point out that it was very unique for us because we did have legislative decision makers who were part of our program. And they gave incredible sites around DEI that was really focused more around human rights, that it is the right thing to do. It's the good thing to do for various countries, for various cities, and for various destinations. I think at the end of the day, it was clear that DEI is clearly a journey, and while everyone who participated in the morning program shared their thoughts about where they are, they all agree that without any doubt that this journey is something that will continue. Now, I will say that there is a lot more that I could share about it, but those are some of the more important highlights that were shared by the group this morning. We'll consolidate all of our thoughts from both of the think tanks and share those as an additional academic study for the group at IGLTA in the near future. But for now, I want to bring an incredible panel together because I believe that we have yet some further insights around DEI that can be shared. So Krishna will serve as our moderator, so we'll bring him to the forefront, followed by Gabrielle and Stephanie, and then Art. So if you'll all come to the stage. And Krishna, you are going to lead us in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And good afternoon, everyone. I know he's already been through that, so I'm not going to go through that again. We've got a great panel lined up, and actually I have to say, it is so nice to see so many people. When John was talking about the idea that, you know, something's wrong with your trousers, I'm surprised I fit into my suit because I haven't worn one for 18 months, but I'm glad I did. And it's incredible that all the hard work that has gone into making this a safe environment where we can meet, where we can interact, where we can travel. I know lots of people have had all sorts of travel stories. My own travel story was India via Serbia, in the UK, and all over the place. So we've been through lots of lengths to be here, so that's great. Now, we've had already a lot of interesting discussion this morning, and this panel is meant to explore how DEI policies can be a formula for business success. Now, I think one of the things we can sort of take as a given is that you're in this room, you already believe in DEI, you already have signed up to the agenda, You've already understood that DEI is important. So what we're hoping to take away from this panel, we were talking earlier, we think it's going to be slightly intense, but we'll try and keep it light and intense. But we want to take away some real lessons and real food for thought in terms of how we in the travel hospitality industry can help move the needle and do better. So we've got a great group of people to talk us through that. We've got, to my left, Stephanie Chung, Chief Growth Officer of Wheels Up, and you are the senior most African American in the private aviation industry, which is incredible, and only the second woman. And fun fact about Stephanie is, like Freddie Mercury, she started directing planes on the tarmac, so that's quite exciting. To her left, we've got Art van der Vorst, who is the Consul General of the Kingdom of Netherlands. Before that, he was spokesperson for the Foreign Office in The Hague. Before that, you were in San Francisco. You've lived in Kenya. You've lived in Nigeria. You've lived in Ramallah. I mean, where have you not been, right? So we've got a very, very international presence here, and hopefully that will help contribute to the discussion. We've got Gabrielle Claiborne, who is co-founder and CEO of Transformation Journeys Worldwide, and you do a lot of work with CEOs, you do a lot of work with boards and with organizations to help build inclusion, particularly for the transgender and gender diverse community, and that's incredible. Gabrielle shared a little bit of her story with us on a call that we had before the panel, and she was saying that, you know, she came out only 10 years ago, and it's been an interesting story, so I'm looking forward to hearing that dynamic. And then, of course, we've got Greg. You already know him. He's literally doing a fly-in, fly-out visit. He's going from here to Minnesota. Minneapolis. Well, there you go. So we've got a very special guest for very little time. So welcome all. Let's get started. Now, as I said at the start, we've already bought into this assumption, right? That DEI is good for business. It's the right thing to do. It generates revenue. It is a clever business strategy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's why we're all here. But the question then from me to you is, how has that actually been borne out in your personal experience as senior leaders, as leaders who are leading transformation, as leaders who are working in government, as leaders who are setting up and taking companies public, right? How has that borne out in your own experience leading businesses and government? So Stephanie, you have a story.
I do. So, you know, one of the things, and we talked about this before as the panel, you know, the real question was what got me into this particular work and why am I so passionate about what we're all trying to get accomplished. When I was a little girl, so I've been in aviation for about 35 years, and when I was a little girl, I grew up, my dad was in the Air Force, so I grew up around active Air Force bases. I grew up hearing planes take off and land every single day of my life. What was interesting, though, is so I knew early on, I was one of those kids that knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in aviation. The problem was that whenever I would see aviation depicted in film or movies or magazines or anything, I only saw if you were a man, you were a pilot, or if you were a woman, you were a flight attendant. And neither one of those ever looked like me. So though I wanted to be in aviation, I didn't know what I could do because I had never seen someone that looked like me in aviation. So with that in mind, to your point, I started off, you know, as the song says, started from the bottom, now we're here, right? So I started off parking planes, loading luggage, and that's how I got started. And then from there, people saw different things in me and would encourage me to get into sales or get into leadership or what have you. But I say all that to say, one of the things that I'm most excited about is not just all the work that all of us are doing, but specifically in the private aviation industry, we are an industry that has lagged behind. We simply need to do better when it comes to inclusivity. And so what my organization, and specifically my team, and I have some of my team members here today with me, what we're really focused in on is diversifying private aviation. both from a consumer perspective as well as an employee pipeline perspective. And we are really focused in on the female community, the people of color community, and the LGBTQ plus community. So one of the things, to answer your question, that we did was it all first starts with images. If you ever Googled private aviation, you would never see gay, lesbian, trans, you'd never see it. You wouldn't even see black people unless they were an athlete or a rapper. And so the stereotypes was ridiculous. So the very first thing that my team and I did when we first came on board is we did the first ever, for our industry, diversity-focused photo shoot. And we made sure that we had a photo shoot and everybody was authentic, from in front of the camera, behind the camera. So when we, shot black families, it was black families. When we shot gay couples, it wasn't grab two men and act like they're gay. No, go to the talent agencies and make sure that every single representation is authentic. So we're really proud of the work that's been done. No one's ever done a, LGBTQ plus photo shoot. No one in our industry. But what we're hoping is that everything that we're doing, and you can Google stuff and actually see all of us in there, right? In any of the pictures. So we're looking for our peers to change and our competitors to follow our suit. Do the same thing. This is the one time we actually do want them to copy us.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you should Google the pictures, because the photo shoot is amazing. There's a Forbes article about it that you can look at, and it's a very interesting story. And certainly, I'm a huge aviation geek. I love flying. I love being on a plane. But certainly, as you say, people like us are never actually represented. And one of the lessons that we took away from this morning's think tank was that representation really matters. Now, Greg, I want to turn to you, because the idea is great, and it's been borne out in your, as you say, Stephanie, it's been borne out in your individual experience. But how has the pandemic changed that?
Well, I think especially for us in Philadelphia, the pandemic has really surfaced the importance of community activism participation. We were fortunate to have, and she's not here, but every time I can say her name, Dr. Alice Stanford, who launched and created the Black Doctors Consortium in Philadelphia. And she's a pediatrician, and she felt that there was no focus around black people, and back then the focus was just about being tested in Philadelphia. And it was through her efforts, collaborating with a number of other medical professionals, black medical professionals, that went out into the community, started doing testing, and lining up people on very cold days to come in, and taking vans out into neighborhoods and getting people tested. But it began to show the strength of what one person can do to impact a community. And I think we all want to find some silver lining as it relates to the pandemic, and this is certainly one. So they moved beyond testing in terms of providing vaccine, and it has been amazing. And some of you may have actually saw her in Good Morning America, because they surprised her with an award in her acknowledgement of it. But I think the interesting thing that the pandemic has showed us is that you have to be engaged, you have to be participative, you have to feel that you can provide some contribution to move things in a better world. The issue as it relates to healthcare disparity and social determinants of health are very real, and those conversations need to be put up front and continued addressed. And in the case of the Black Doctors Consortium, one person who felt that there was not enough focus just around testing has made a phenomenal impact in terms of hoping to ensure in a city that now is touting 72% inoculations is a real heavy-duty accomplishment.
That's incredible. So the solution really came through that engagement within the community.
Absolutely.
And within the thinking that actually diversity brought to the table. And
Absolutely.
It's a better outcome for everyone, because it means you're increasing testing, you're increasing vaccination, and you're increasing safety. Everyone's safer. Gabrielle, you have some views on this as well. You have some views of how the pandemic has shaped the response for diversity and inclusion, particularly in the work that you do. What would you like to share that with us?
So thank you for that. And I love what you said, Greg, because I feel like in the work that we do at Transformation Journeys, we have had to actually reshape the pandemic as something that was happening for us and not necessarily to us. And so folks who have had this paradigm shift about the pandemic and how we show up allows us to kind of lean into those, a different paradigm and say, okay, what can we learn from this opportunity here? And so what we're finding in the work that we're doing is that it's created a space within organizations to really lean into some difficult conversations. We often say to our clients, you know, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We've heard, I'm sure many of you have heard that, but being comfortable with getting uncomfortable means having those courageous conversations. Sitting down across the table with someone who may have a different lived experience than you, and lean in to listen and listen to hear, and not necessarily bring a solution, but show us a sense of empathy for that lived experience, if you will. So I feel like creating these cultures and these spaces of courageous conversations allows folks who have been in the margins to all of a sudden feel like that they can emerge, not in a space that's just safe for them, but a space that is a space of belonging where they can bring their whole self to that space. So I'm encouraged by just, you know, a lot of the conversations that are starting to emerge within the workplace, because I feel like when we have those courageous conversations, we start breaking down the perceived differences. And I really like to stay away from the word differences. I favor the word unique, because I feel like all of us are unique expressions of the human experience. And when we're able to sit down across the table from one another, take our biases out of our lenses and get to know one another, that we actually see that we have more in common than not.
I love the idea of creating space for listening, but in order to create space for listening, you've got to ask questions,
Yes.
right? So the question then is, okay, we've agreed that diversity leads to better outcomes in business. We've all been through the pandemic. It's been a difficult time. It's brought us closer together. We've got to know each other in ways that we never thought we would. But if we're taking those lessons and then we want to take them a step further and we want to embed those into our organizations, what is it that organizations, businesses, people who are in this room can do to adopt DEI, not just as, hey, it's nice to have DEI, but as an active business strategy? I mean, Gabrielle, again, you do this day for day. You work with organizations to help them embed DEI into their business model. What are the questions they should be asking?
Well, in the work that we do to create that culture of belonging, I love going back to culture, because at the end of the day, that's what creates a space for all of us to show up authentically. And to create that culture of belonging, our approach is both personal cultural competency and organizational cultural competency. So not only do we have to have a competency at a personal level, we have to be able to sit down across the table with one another and have conversations, but we also have to understand how that personal cultural competency translates to what our organizational responsibility should be. And that includes looking at things like policy, your community engagement, your facilities. I was so glad to see our mayor. I'm from Atlanta, so glad to see our mayor. I'm also on that board. Glad to see our mayor highlight the work that we've done on the board as far as, you know, providing all gender restrooms across the city facilities. So is understanding that this approach to belonging is not just a straight line, and it's not just one stakeholder there and one stakeholder there. It's the whole organization understanding what role you play in creating that culture of belonging.
And culture is something that you cannot, is not fungible, it's not dispensable, and you have to work to create it, right? But let's talk about that then. Let's talk about the fact that you may have the passion. You may have the passion for your work. You may have the passion for your organization. You may have the passion for diversity, equity, inclusion. You may, you know, carry or fly the pride flag. But then what about the process? Greg, you've got ideas here. How do we translate passion into process?
Well, I think it's important to have a clear sense of how far passion will take you.
Yeah.
And you can be excited about a new car for a certain period of time and eventually another one. But I think it's realizing that there needs to be some form of process and structure that we can move into. And we've talked about culture. And for so many organizations that embark upon efforts around DEI, they've not really done that self-examination. They don't know where their starting point is as an organization to really determine what kind of culture they have and what they need to do. In some cases, beyond the sessions that you want to have, you actually need to focus more on the culture of your organization, whether it's through governance or leadership, but really getting a sense of what is it as a company, as an organization, that we prioritize as it relates to DE&I. I think it's also important, though, to realize that it is everyone's responsibility. You know, the leadership, they provide the why as to how or what we do as an organization around DEI, and they'll provide us the resources that we need to be more effective in that. But the how is the work that we do, and as individuals, the work that we do on ourselves, evaluating our biases and how we can go about correcting those so that we can be participative in the culture that is created within the organization. But that process is that there's consistency, that there's commitment, that there's an understanding that this is a journey, it's not just going to stop. I think it's also important to take into account the investment, the financial investment, and of course that prioritization around supplier diversity. This is something through a process that should include all ability of individuals to contribute and be involved in a conversation. So those would be the ways that I would bring it together from a process perspective.
And I'd love to add to that as well is, you know, and I completely agree with everything you said, you also have to create that North Star because there's the process. So 100% passion will not be enough once you put the process together. But then you also need the North Star because when opposition comes, and it will always come, what then will be the response?
That's right.
And that's the piece that if you don't, when you're in the middle of it, is not the time to figure out how are we going to respond, right? So you really have to spend the time on the front end being prepared for when the haters are going to hate and they, you know, blow you up on social media or anything like that. You cannot take the time then to figure it out. It must be part of the planning process, to Greg's point, on the front end.
So you got the 3 Ps. You've got passion, process, and preparedness,
Yes.
right? I used to be a debater at high school, so you always have rule of threes. But actually, to that, there is a deep point, right? In the sense that, again, I keep going back to this thing. Everyone in this room has bought into this idea of diversity and inclusion. But actually, what that means is a lot of us have to have some difficult conversations with people who have not bought into this idea. And those difficult conversations set us up for when things go wrong and when the haters come, when the Twitter trolls are at it, right? How do you do that? How do you have those difficult conversations? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, hey, I'm a black girl, so it's like our superpower. So having a difficult conversation is really not something that I shy away from. But with that,
I should have rephrased that.
yeah, maybe ask somebody else. Though. I'm kidding. What I would say though is you're right. You really do have to be prepared. This work is hard.
Yeah.
This work is hard. In order for us to make the changes that we all want to make, it's going to take diligent, focused, committed, you know, dogmatic effort, right? There is no pulling back and whatnot. So how I have found that's helpful is, you know, when having the conversations, it really is making sure that everybody's, one, on the same page of what we're going to get accomplished. And also it's important that it's from top down. So for me, from my board to, you know, my CEO, like all the executive suite, we're all on the same page there. But that has to happen because when you start getting into, let's say, the difficult conversations, you're going to be asking a lot of questions. I think Gabrielle hit the point on the head. You're going to have to actively listen as well because we all grow up with different, you know, backgrounds. There's no way we all have the same thought process. In fairness, you do want to understand where that other person's coming from because there's a chance that it's savable, right?
Yes.
But you cannot run away from or ignore or decide not to have the difficult conversation because it's uncomfortable. At the end of the day, and Greg hit it on the head, this is everybody's responsibility. Yeah. It's everybody's responsibility. So you do have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, but you have to just, for me, I think you hit it head on and you don't shy away from it.
Okay, so let's come back to that in a moment, because one of the things I want to do here then is break that up. So, Art, let's turn to you. And I got it wrong. You weren't in Kenya, you were in Nigeria. You were in Nigeria, not in Nairobi. So I apologize for that. But you've lived all around the world, and you are a senior diplomat, and you are leading organizations, you're leading a group of people often reacting in really difficult circumstances. I mean, we talked about the fact that you lived in Ramallah. I mean, that's not easy, right? That's not easy. What's going on around you is not easy. So you're building a team that needs, to Stephanie's point, preparedness. They need to build in preparedness into their model before they're ever faced with an obstacle. So to that point, how do you as a senior leader do that? How do you create that team? How do you create that space?
Well, thank you, Krishna, for that question also. And I think already some interesting thoughts have been shared, but I'm not working for a business but a government. So I think it's important that we are the government. So we all are the government. So we have a responsibility to have a reflection for the people that we serve. And that is something, my activism also in it, that I think that is important to my Dutch nationals. Unfortunately, I see all empty chairs because I couldn't travel here. Otherwise, it would be a whole Dutch audience, for sure. But no, I don't have to go that far to Ramallah or to Abuja, Nigeria, to talk about how important DEI is. We came to Atlanta 3 years ago to set up a new office. We were recruiting new staff members here in Atlanta. And I found all these CVs of people that were all here in Metro Atlanta, Atlanta-based, Midtown. And I thought, they're very liberal, very interesting. I agree with everything that they say, but this is not a region that I have to work in. So to get a better understanding, I had to go to Dalton or had to go out of to Alabama to see if people would be interesting to take up the opportunity to work in a diplomatic office and to connect to those that are from Midtown Atlanta. And I thought it was quite an interesting step forward that, you know, working on DEI is not somewhere far away. It's always close to us wherever we are. It's a challenge, always a challenge to get the outside world inside. And as a manager, I'm responsible also for results. I'm Dutch, so I'm very much focused on trade and business and successful expansion. And I can only do that if I know what is going on and people bring in the ideas that are relevant to that objective. And I felt that it is, you know, just starting before the presidential campaign, the Senate race and so on, trying to focus on trade is very hard where all your office is politicized. But still, you try to create a platform where the success is already that people will talk with each other and they will listen. And I think the skill set of listening is not a given. There's a lot of talk, there are a lot of talkers, but I feel that finding people that have a balanced skill set or want to invest in listening is something very close to my heart and something that I really want to invest in and to try to foster as well.
So one thing that I want to take away also from that is, you know, a lot of people in this room are allies, a lot of people in this room are diverse, everyone on this panel is diverse, and we've all had different challenges, right? I'm sure you'll be diplomatic about this, but post-2016, sending a married gay man to set up a consulate in the Deep South, right?
Yes.
Like, that must have led to some difficult conversations. How do you stay resilient in the face of those conversations?
Yeah, I think also you have to always, and that is, you have your own responsibility, or those that are not ready there, you have to support them. And for myself, I don't shy away to be a gay man, and I'm not shying away that I bring my husband to the governor of South Carolina. And the governor of South Carolina, for those that are from America, do understand that South Carolina is a bit more conservative than Amsterdam is.
Just a bit.
A little bit of diplomacy here. Is very much interested in if Shell, Philips, Exxon or Unilever is going to invest in their state. So we have never experienced any hindrances to talk or have a conversation on the highest level, or nor would the governor would ask how my husband was doing. That I thought, no, Mr. Kemp, that is interesting that you would be interested in my husband, but still, you know, they have also alternative, alternative motives, yes. Lost in translation, sorry for that. So economics do help, and I'm very much supported by my Dutch business community, also the European community. Besides that, I'm the Netherlands Consul General. I represent the presidency for the European Union. So for the whole European business industry here in the Southeast, they are top 1 ranking with investments in companies and expansions opportunities. So, and they are willing to put a gay man or anybody for the LGBTQ community forward and push them into this region to be successful.
So I think that goes to the point that John made earlier, and that was about this idea that, you know, we don't believe in boycott because you then don't transform people's thinking. You don't change people's thinking because you're not engaging. Let's then go to you, Gabrielle, because, you know, you've had a very personal experience about this. You set up your business at a time when you yourself were becoming public with your identity. So again, how do you stay resilient, and how do you keep having those conversations that, first of all, change doesn't happen overnight, right? So change means chipping away and being like art, having those conversations at event after event, but then also it's a process of internal transformation too. So how do you make those two things happen?
Well, do we have a while?
There's an open bar apparently after this.
No, I really feel like I've just recently wrote a book on Embrace Your Truth, the Journey of Authenticity. I think that I'm sure everyone in here has a story around their own authentic journey, but you know, for me, it's like what I learned in my journey of authenticity was the most important thing I could do is be visible. Without me being visible, I was not doing myself justice, nor was I doing someone else justice who's going to be following in my footsteps. And to know that not only did I have to live authentic for me, but I have to live authentic for those that I want to advocate for, right? And being able to understand that living your life authentically is not just a privilege, but it's a responsibility. And I think as human beings, we have to understand that our lives are not just our lives. Our lives are to inspire and to motivate and encourage folks to live their highest and best self, right? And so I've adopted this approach of just saying, you know, I am going to be visible. I often say, this is what you get. I mean, there's nothing else that I can bring to the table other than this. And I feel like that when we all do that, we're giving others permission to say, okay, look at that person did that. And hopefully it's an inspiration for others to do the same. So be visible, own your voice, you know. For so many years, I lived my life the way culture expected me to live, and it wasn't until I got to the place that I didn't have to allow what others expected about me, how I should live and how I should show up, to own that I did not have to let that part of my story define me. I could define my own story, and just, you know, being authentic and being visible is how I've managed to perceive to process and move through my gender transition.
So I love that idea of defining your own story, because I think for a lot of us who are diverse and who face all sorts of obstacles, you know, multiple layers of obstacles, we can often be in a position where we feel that other people are defining us, right? In fact, that's where we start. And so defining your own journey is a great way of thinking about it. Now, that operates at the individual level, but also it's got to operate at an organizational level, right? One of the interesting conversations that's happening right now, and I want to move the conversation now from the individual, from the personal to the organizational. And we had a question that came in from the audience earlier in the day. Ask the audience. But we had a question that came in about ESG, and there's a lot of focus on ESG. I'm a corporate lawyer, so I see this all the time. You know, we're working with corporations, we're advising them on disclosures, we're advising them on board building. Usually the ESG is always about the E. And again, you know, you're in the aviation industry, Of course, it's going to be about the E, right? But actually, we're now trying to move that towards the S and the G, and actually these things go hand in hand. So one of the questions I want to ask, and I'll turn to you first, Art, is because we're seeing all of this engagement, not just from investors, but also we're seeing it from regulators and governments. Governments are saying, so those of you who've been following the news, NASDAQ now says that in order to list on NASDAQ, you need to have 2 diverse board members. One of them has to be a woman. Goldman Sachs is saying they're not going to underwrite IPOs if you don't have a female board member. That's a start. I still think 1 female board member is, 9 board members too few, but we can have that conversation. And the SEC is saying we're going to require human capital disclosures. Regulators and governments are beginning to take interest in this, and they're beginning to move the conversation. Why is that? Why is this happening at an institutional level?
Well, once again, I think that we represent, we are the people for the Netherlands or for any country, I guess, that government is trying to move forward on it. But I also realize that being now for 25 years in the Foreign Office, that with the ambitious and the progressiveness that the Netherlands has, we do not even get to 30% of heads of missions that we be women in the Netherlands, whereas 50% start. And how come? So that uncomfortable conversations have to happen. And also you can ask yourself, okay, we made a promise to the people to do so, and we are a country of freedoms, and we are a country not to be regulated. We do not like laws. Well, I think many of this in Georgia is being recognized and similar. So we say, okay, we have these incentives, but now we see that we don't get those objectives and those results, and it is time for a next page. So that is something that in my own country that is so progressive and is so advanced on participation in the workforce and support for minorities, to be present, to have a new conversation about what will work next. And that is what I would say phase 2 of it. And to your point also, Gabrielle, it is also a journey. We do not know everything yet, and what you don't know, you can't deal with. So we need to know. It's easy to say, oh, I don't like it, or it is stupid, or it's not going to work. Well, we haven't tested it, so we are, for instance, now going into the objectives of having 40% women, female participation as a leadership in government. But we haven't had ever a female prime minister in the Netherlands, just saying.
Yeah.
So they can say it for the organization, but I think that politicians also should take the responsibility to step forward.
But you do have a king who used to fly a plane, so.
For sure. And a queen, by the way.
So I want to come to you, Stephanie, and then I want to come back to you, Greg, because the other thing that I want us to think about is, and we were having a conversation, I think Apurva and I were having this conversation earlier, in this industry, in the travel hospitality industry, the fact is actually the point that you made right at the start about the advertising campaign, right? This is an aspirational industry. So you have the ability to make the market. You have the ability to raise the bar for other corporations. But also there needs to be recognition that actually this industry has a reliance on actually minorities who are working in it, right? Because if you're working in the travel, tourism, hospitality industry, you're likely to be a person of color, you're likely to be a woman, you are likely to be an immigrant or a migrant worker, and that means you are likely to be marginalized. And so it kind of operates in this space where it's both aspirational, but it's also reliant on people who are marginalized, right? Now, we know that the pandemic has impacted those people really badly. Of course, the hospitality industry has been impacted really badly. But even within that, there are people who are on the margins who have really suffered even more than others. We know there's an astounding statistic that actually the job losses in the US during the pandemic have been job losses for women of color, and that white men have actually gained jobs because, for example, if you work in a if you work in a factory that's been shut down, you can go and stack boxes in Amazon. It's easier for you to do it because you have more access, you have more ability to go and do those things. And so here's where I want to bring that conversation then, is actually it's about looking at your ecosystem. It's not just about the individual, it's not just about the organization and its branding, but it's about what's the ecosystem that we're operating in. Now, I'm sure you, Stephanie, you've just demerged, right? And you've just listed. Now, here's the question. You must be having those conversations with investors because they must be asking you those questions. So what are those conversations like?
I can't tell you. I'm just kidding.
It's fine, I'm a lawyer, you can tell me.
No, you know what? Really good point. Really good point. And so you're right. I guess let me back up a little bit. You do have to look at it holistically, right?
Yep.
So yes, if I put my officer hat on, here are the facts. And actually, I think John showed something earlier. When I look at the female market, the LGBTQ plus market, and the people of color market, if I just look at that for travel specifically, in 2019, so pre-COVID, those groups did almost $500 billion just in travel in the United States. So not only is it the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. Going back to the question that you asked, Art, if you just look at business and the way that the world is shifting, at least in the United States, minorities are becoming majorities, et cetera, you'd be crazy not to figure out how do you do a better job by making sure everybody feels included into your product, service, company, et cetera. So that's the outside part. Inside part, to your point, is we've got to make sure that when we're pulling in, that we also are pulling up from within, right? So one of the things for us, it wasn't. There were three things that we were focusing on, and I always say it's getting the company prepared. So pulling back from the sales part of it, right, which is just receiving money from diverse consumers, but how do you throttle back and make sure that the employees that we have, are they feeling included? Do they have a voice at the table? Do we have a strong career path for them, right? So start and make sure that your house is in order. And then from there, well, what does the industry look like? I'm all about leaving a legacy right now. I'm a lot older than I look. So this is one of those things that this is the last hurrah, right? How do you create an industry and leave a heritage? And how you do that is to get more people that look like all of us and believe and have thoughts like all of us into the industry that has historically not welcomed them, right? So how do we create that pipeline? And then the third piece, which is really what you're touching upon, is also the philanthropic work. Now for us, we're fortunate. We've got a whole division called Wheels Up Cares, and that's where our charitable and philanthropic arm focuses. And we'll get behind different charities that are important to the different demographics that I've just mentioned. And that's important to our consumers and our customers and our members and our employees. So for an example, in 2020 during the pandemic, we knew that food deprivation was hitting underserved communities more than ever. There was about 54 million Americans who had never actually struggled with food insecurities before. So we don't have every resource, but we certainly have high net worth individuals and we have private jets. So what are those resources that we can activate to help change this situation? So what we did is we teamed up with Feeding America. We painted one of our planes orange, which is their colors, and we put that plane all over the place. And whenever it would touch down, and we teamed up with some of our partners and investors like Russell Simmons and J-Lo and A-Rod and Tom Brady, and obviously we've got a great Rolodex of people, but they got behind it as well. And so what we committed during that time, because we don't want to just be again taking from the environment, how do we give back? What we had committed at that time was we would give 10 million meals towards Feeding America. But when we pull in the celebrity power, when we pull in a plane, when we have a plane touchdown everywhere, I think the last count I saw, we're at 70 million meals, right? So that's a way that when you look at it, you're right, it's aspirational, sure, to want to travel. But there's things that we can all do beyond getting you from point A to point B in my world, or having you stay in a beautiful hotel for, or a wonderful country. What else can we do? And that's when I think, when I say it's holistic, you've got to look at the entire process to be impactful.
And so there was an interesting story that you said, because it's the painting the plane, right? Because you keep the livery. You don't just do it during 1 month.
Right.
You keep that livery and it flies everywhere. And that goes back again to the point that someone else was making earlier on stage, is this, consumers are noticing that, because they notice if you suddenly paint a plane in rainbow colors during Pride Month and then suddenly you have to repaint it because it's flying somewhere where you might not like that. So it's actually about operationalizing and embedding this way of thinking into your business model. Greg, let's talk about that then. Let's talk about how you do that, because it's nice to be able to say, oh, I would love to operationalize this. I'd love to make this part of my business strategy.
Right.
What do we have to do to actually make that happen when you're running a business or when you are a mid-level executive in a business?
So I think it's realizing that it's more than your voice. It is gaining the voice of as many to ensure that you have as full of an insight around the subject as necessary. I think it's also realizing that there are a variety of resources that individuals can bring to your conversation and your efforts in order to make them work. It's also realizing that as an organization, it does have to be built in, and we've talked about strategy, and that strategy means that it is a business imperative, and as a business imperative, it can cascade down in a variety of different ways. Even if you start a diversity council, that's a wonderful thing to do, but what are they doing to drive the business forward? So I think as you begin to look at how you implement it within an organization and it moves the organization forward, it's about having the voice of others who can ensure the authenticity, the inclusivity of what you're doing, providing focus around the equity issues that might develop as a part of it, because in most cases there probably is going to be some form of equity that is not allowing everyone to participate completely in whatever it is that you're doing. And we haven't talked much about it, but it's also having a sense of measuring what the performance of this has really been. Like, what did we really do? Now, I'm a big advocate of also talking about the fact that things have to be resourced accordingly. Like, you can't just do this and hope for the best. As I say, you know, DEI is not done on good looks, although sometimes I think it is. But in any case,
Just look at this panel. So,
but I do feel that there is a need for there to be a normality of saying DEI and strategy as a connected phrase. Yeah. And in that respect, as you think through, it is purposeful, it can be intentional, it can be deliberate, and it can be as a result of trying to achieve something that you can measure and in fact have greater results. But I think it's pivotal to ensure to have other insights and views that are driving it, so that it's not just driven by one person's perspective.
So that's interesting, because you're saying what really actually is key is you need to measure things, right? You measure your profit, you measure your loss, you measure your inflows, outflows, you measure depreciation and amortization. Why aren't you measuring your diversity, equity, inclusion, right?
Well,
okay.
I will say, though, that there is often this approach that we did such a great job, there couldn't have possibly been another way for us to do this.
That's right.
And in fact, it's like anything. You might need to slightly adjust it this way or that way, or perhaps you have to throw it out with the bathwater and start all over again. But that's like any part of your business. Right. You will certainly put certain approaches into place with the hope that it will achieve the intended outcome. But it doesn't mean because it didn't work, you throw it out. You may have to go back and recalibrate it. And I think that that's an important component around DEI that leaders have to become very comfortable with, that you may have to recalibrate this, that you may not hit it on the mark the first time. And that was clear in a conversation we had earlier this morning, where a number of the leaders said, we're doing it, but we know we need to do it better. So I think that idea that we can readjust, we can calibrate in order to continuously move this to get it where it needs to be, but that once again is based upon measurements and direction that we can follow up on.
So we've got very few minutes left, and actually, I don't know, so those of you who sent questions in may have noticed that I've woven some of those questions into the questions I've already asked. And before the thank you music starts playing and we all get thrown off the stage, I want to actually just move in those last 2 or 3 minutes of this conversation into talking about just exactly what you just said, Greg. Because we've talked about the idea that, you know, we need the passion, we need the process, we need listening, we need to ask questions in order to listen, but then also sometimes there are hidden things, right? And Gabrielle, you said to me earlier, you don't know what you don't know, right? And one of the questions that came in from the audience was that someone said they were struggling with reaching out to minorities who are often marginalized even within this community, who may not be very visible because they may not be very easy with being visible, particularly if they're non-binary, if they're gender diverse, and they are not necessarily very comfortable talking about it. So you've got to seek them out actively. How do you do that?
Well, you have to show up where we are. And where we are in places like this. in your local LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. There are nonprofit initiatives across the U.S. that are actually advocating for TGNC-MB, transgender nonconforming and non-binary equitable employment and entrepreneurship. So you have to show up in these spaces where we show up. There are many trans-led nonprofit organizations led by Black trans individuals, and that demographic is the most marginalized among the entire community. So making sure that you're engaging with those organizations, and there's many ways you can do that. You can volunteer for them. You can provide a seat at the table and elevate their voice within your organization. You can bring, to your point, Greg, you can bring those voices in so that you can be informed of what you don't know, by allowing and elevating those voices. So local Chamber of Commerce, your Pride organization. I know that many of you are also plugged into your Pride. Pride organizations are starting to be more and more intentional around gender diversity, making sure that the TGNC-MB community is elevated to the level of awareness and understanding, giving them a voice. So these are the places you find us. Here in the state of Georgia, Out Georgia Business Alliance, which is a local LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, we have started a employment and workplace initiative for TGNC-MB individuals, TGNC 360. You heard Malik, the mayor of Atlanta, they are putting together LGBTQ opportunity fairs. This is a great way to plug in to the community. If you have relationships with your local higher education groups or institutions where you live, great place to plug into there. There's a lot of funnels into gender diverse individuals, and it's just a matter of just showing up where they are.
So you have to be active and you have to seek them out. I mean, I have this thing where, and time's almost up. So one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. But I had this thing where I was an intern in a law firm, and I wanted to see whether there was an LGBTQ group. This was a long time ago. And I said, is there an LGBTQ affinity group or an ERG? And the head of HR at this firm, that shall remain nameless, and it's not my current firm, said, oh, I'm sure we have gay people, but we just don't know where to find them. Well, you got to seek them out, right? And the industry has moved forward. The legal industry's moved forward. Hospitality industry's moved forward from that. But again, it comes back to you need to actively seek people out. Art, question to you then. We spent a lot of time talking about difference, right? And uniqueness. I love that word, Gabrielle. I love the idea of uniqueness. Yeah. But we spend a lot of time dwelling on what's different. We've all got different stories. Now, you've lived, worked all over the world, you've experienced lots of different cultures, and you've led teams in often difficult circumstances. You're a diplomat. What's the commonality? What brings us together at the end of the day when we are talking about our differences?
Yeah, I think that it's never us versus them. Nowhere. From my office outside, looking to the window, who's walking on the street, if that would be Ramallah, Albania, Kosovo, Nigeria, or wherever I live, or my colleagues live around the world gives you new perspectives, and that's so nice also about your organization as well. It's an international organization, so it connects. We talk a lot about America and America opportunities and so on, but at the end of the day, it's a global organization, so how do you connect the different experiences around the world, and where is that denominator? I don't know where the denominator is, but I believe that if you're not going out and be interested and talk, and not talk, but question where you can assist and help and move forward, you will not get that connection or that understanding where we want to go. I also would like to look into our own community, the LGBTQ community. I think as a white gay man, maybe a loud white gay man, I see a lot of problems and challenges also in understandings of the other bisexual, non-binary, trans community and so on. So I think there's also, within the LGBTQ community, I'm also trying to, around the world, to create a platform that we get to know ourselves better and understand where we are coming from. And that we can also be a little bit more supportive towards each other. And that is something that I, not pessimistic about, but I'm very activistic about that. I think that we can do more about being a better ally for ourselves before we can also unify all of us.
So one last thing, one sentence from each one of you, okay? What can we, each one of us in this room, do to put that into action? Because we are all coming from different organizations, different levels of seniority. It's great if you're on the board of an organization, it's great if you're the CEO, but what happens if you're mid or junior? How do you do it? So what is the one thing that all of us in this room can do to help create that action? Greg, I'm going to start with you.
Own the seat that you sit in and bring voice to it.
Say that again?
Yeah.
Own the seat that you sit in and bring voice to it.
See ourselves not as separate, but as connected.
I think it's important to stand up and stand out.
Always know there's two sides to every story.
Wonderful. And I think one thing that comes out from all of that is that of allyship, right? We can all be better allies to each other.
Yeah.
What did I do today to be a better ally to other people, right? There's this line from Hamilton that says, if you don't know what you stand for, but what will you fall for, right? So what am I going to fall for? What's my legacy? That's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing these thoughts with us. And as John said, there's an open bar later tomorrow, so the conversation can continue. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David.